Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over my updated dual color Planeswalker tier list. So, let's get into it. This video is going to start out a lot like my monocolor tier list, where I'm going to go ahead and move some Planeswalkers around on my tier list, in part because I now have an S plus tier, in part because the S tier has changed, and in part just because of the cards that have rotated in and out of Standard. Once I've gone over all of the tier list changes, I will then add the new Planeswalkers to the list. So, as a reminder, S plus, those are going to be Planeswalkers that are going to be the best at what they do pretty much regardless of what cards rotate in and out of Standard. S tier is going to be Planeswalkers that are the best at something in particular, right? So something that you would probably want to pick up that Planeswalker for. And A tier are just going to be generally boss Planeswalkers. F tier is absolute garbage. So these are Planeswalkers that you can absolutely avoid at all costs. So the first Planeswalker that's going to be moving is going to be Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria has a first and second ability that are largely not too great, but the third ability, Major Zalfir's Fate, is one of the best abilities on a Planeswalker in the game. It's so powerful that it really doesn't matter what else we have in Standard to accommodate for this, and so as a result, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is going to move up into the S plus tier. I happen to think that this is one of the two Planeswalkers that every new player should try and get their hands on as quickly as possible. I know that it's a dual color walker, but it's just there's so much that you can do with this Planeswalker, and being able to exile things every time you draw a card is just such an incredibly potent control ability that it doesn't really matter what else you have. You're going to get a lot out of this Planeswalker. The only real downsides to Teferi are Teferi's health total. 102 is a bit on the low side. The first and second ability, once again, aren't particularly great abilities, but they are indeed passable. There are times that you will want to use them. And then Teferi's mana gains happen to be very balanced, which is part of what will make Teferi a very good walker for newer players. The next Planeswalker on the list that is going to be moving is going to be Ral Zarek. Not Ral Zarek, wow. Talk about an old school flashback. Ral Izzet Viceroy. I think Ral Zarek was the original Ral. But anyways, Ral Izzet Viceroy has the magical +5/+5 in the blue and red mana bonus. So that is the best set of mana bonuses, in my opinion, for a Planeswalker. And Ral is just the end-all be-all best spell Planeswalker in the game right now. So as long as blue and red have access to powerful spells, Ral is going to be one of the best walkers in the game. Ral currently has access to Wizard class, but I'm finding that the more sets that come out, the more that we get really good red and blue spells. And so Ral is going to move up into that S plus tier for me. The first ability, Prophetic Research, serves as card draw, it serves as graveyard filler, and it serves as mana gain. So those are all really valuable abilities, and it's only 6 loyalty, which makes it very easy to use. And the third ability, Flux of Genius, is just absolutely phenomenal, because there's always going to be really good low-cost spells, and whenever you cast a spell, you get to burn something for 6 and then draw 2 cards to fill your hand up more. So regardless of the second ability, the first, third, and the mana gains are definitely going to help Ral maintain his spot in the top of the tier list. The Rechargeable Blast is not a particularly good ability, but it will be useful from time to time. So, I mean, it's still good, it's just not great. The next one that is going to be moving up is going to be Kalemni. Kalemni is going to go ahead and occupy that S plus tier as well. This is for a few reasons. The +5/+5 to white and red definitely helps Kalemni out. Having a whopping 128 health is definitely going to help Kalemni as well. And then Kalemni's abilities, all 3 of them are good abilities, with the first and the third being potentially great abilities. So the first ability is only 4 loyalty, so you can just spam it. And then on top of that, it's going to fetch a big baddie from your deck, creature, and then it's going to create a support that with experience gain is going to boost your first creature and give it haste. The third ability is going to give you 10 experience, and it's going to make a particularly nasty support that makes it so that when any creature you control with base cost 14 or greater attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to the opponent's planeswalker and to the first opposing creature. Part of why Kalemny is in the S plus tier is that I happen to think that Kalemny is probably the best planeswalker that you can use for the bottom node in a Timeless Voyage, that one where your opponent gets 2 swaps, because you can just spam the first ability to get specific bad creatures. Like, by bad creatures I mean like good creatures, but bad for your opponent, and then when everyone gets all their loyalty, you pop your third ability and then just outright kill your opponent in one turn. So you can do some really nasty stuff with Kalemny. As long as red and white have powerful cards, Kalemny is going to be strong, and then red and white will pretty much always have powerful creatures. In Legacy, Kalemny is the best bearer of the Hazoret's Undying Fury and Deploy the Gatewatch, because Kalemny is able to have 6 spells and 6 supports. So it makes it really easy for you to build a powerful deck around Kalemny. The next Planeswalker that is going to be moving up is going to be Garruk Cursed Huntsman. Garruk Cursed Huntsman is kind of the most perfect starter player planeswalker that there is, apart from being dual color. I say apart from being dual color because it's going to cost you about 160,000 runes to get this thing to level 60. But Garruk has such strong abilities that it really doesn't matter what cards you put in a Garruk Cursed Huntsman deck, you're going to have a good deck. So the second ability, Stalk the Prey, is, I think, the best removal ability in the game for just single removal. So it's going to destroy a creature, you're going to gain life equal to that creature's toughness, and you're going to draw 2 cards. So you're getting 3 phenomenal abilities in one, and it's only 12 loyalty. So it's definitely an ability that you're going to be able to use on repeat. So it kind of resets the game for you a little bit, because you're getting rid of something that's ideally really bad on the opponent's side of the battlefield. You're going to gain life, which is going to put you back in the game, and you're going to draw cards, which is ideally going to advance your board state. So definitely really, really good ability. The third ability, Improved Cursed Predation, is going to boost all of your creatures by 4 every single turn, and it's also going to give your creatures Berserker and Trample. I know it has that caveat of you having the creature with the greatest power, but you're pretty much always going to have that with green anyways, and putting a 10/10 on the battlefield by getting 5 Vicious Wolf tokens definitely reinforces that. Hunting Pack is not particularly great, but it does have that added utility of being able to get rid of opposing Vanguards, and Vanguards have made a splash in the current standard because of things like Teferi. So this Garruk is definitely an S plus tier planeswalker for me. It's actually, in my opinion, one of the scariest planeswalkers to go up against, just because it's very possible for the planeswalker's loyalty abilities alone to win the game, between having removal and the Vicious Wolf tokens that are just going to keep boosting and potentially kill you. It's really, really good. So this brings us to another planeswalker that has moved into the S plus tier range. I got a lot of flack the last time I made this video, or at least the tier list for the dual color walkers, because I did not put Ashiok Nightmare Muse into the top tier. And now that I've played around in Pauper PvP, along with some other niche builds, I'm going to go ahead and say that Ashiok definitely belongs in that S plus tier range. So Ashiok is gifted with that wonderful +5/+5 in both blue and black. And then Ashiok's abilities are all very good. So the third ability is an absolute win condition of an ability. You're going to create a hexproof creature that is just going to buff itself up every single turn, because its power toughness is going to be equal to the number of cards in your opponent's exile. And when it attacks, you exile the top 5 cards of your opponent's library. And on top of that, when you use the ability, you draw 4 cards. And for such a powerful ability, it only costs 15 loyalty, so it's really easy to get it off. The second ability, Consuming Fear, is going to serve as both removal, and it's going to get rid of cards from your opponent's hand, which is absolutely phenomenal. And then finally, the first ability, you're going to create a Nightmare Harvest token, which is going to make it so that whenever you play an enchantment, you're going to exile the top 3 cards of your opponent's library and destroy the top 3 cards of your library. And then you can choose to pick one of the cards from your opponent's exile and fetch it and give it mana. But between having this first ability to exile cards from your opponent's library, the third ability as a creature that is going to get boosted by the number of cards in your opponent's exile, and the second ability serving as removal, Ashiok is just an all-around great planeswalker that doesn't care about what cards you have in your collection. You're going to get a lot of power out of this planeswalker. Now, as for some other planeswalkers that are going to be moving around, we're going to start by moving Huatli over here up one tier to the S tier rank. So you might be wondering why it is that I think that Huatli Radiant Champion belongs in the S tier. But for me, it's a pretty simple answer in that I happen to think that Huatli is the best planeswalker to use for nodes in 2 of our standard events right now. So she's going to be very good for both the Werewolf node in, I believe it's called the Harvest Tide, and then she's also the best planeswalker, in my opinion, to use for the Disturb node. So she's able to give you quite a lot of power in both of those. For Disturb, you're able just to throw a whole bunch of things in your graveyard because of Gather the Pack, which is a very accessible card. And so as long as you have that card, you're going to be able to do pretty well by using Huatli. Furthermore, her abilities are going to be based on you having creatures on the battlefield, and since at the moment of my recording this video, Disturb is able to have a ridiculous number of creatures that breaks the limit of 3 on the battlefield, you're able to get way more out of Huatli than you are out of her normally, and she's already a really good planeswalker. She has that magical +5/+5 to her mana bonuses, which is really good. And then, of course, you're able to throw in not only Teferi, Hero of Dominaria in the event that you have it, but for the Werewolf node, you're able to use Brutal Cathar, and that's able to provide you with so much control that it makes the node a lot easier than it is with other planeswalkers. So given that Huatli is, in my opinion, the best for both of our new standard events, and those standard events are going to be in standard for quite a while, I do think that she's absolutely worth the pickup. Outside of those events, she's more of a niche walker. She's still quite good, but she isn't an absolute must-have. The next planeswalker that's going to be moving into the S tier for me is actually going to be Angrath the Flame Chained. Angrath is moving here in part because of his absolute utility in the Seize the Day event. Angrath is just an absolute beast there, and really any event where there are going to be cards that you can mill into your opponent's graveyard or make them do mass discard or really anything like that, Angrath is able to put in a heck of a lot of work. The downside to Angrath is that Angrath really doesn't have as much utility in Standard right now as Angrath has in the Legacy formats. And I know that I'm pretty much, for the most part, trying to avoid basing this too much on Legacy. Angrath absolutely needs to have specific cards to be good, but if you have those cards, then Angrath is able to put in a lot of work. Remember, some of the planeswalkers that are S tier for me are S tier because they are the best at what they do in specific events. Now, can you still play those events and win with planeswalkers in the S plus tier range instead? Absolutely. But Angrath's third ability is just such an incredibly strong ability, along with having this absolutely whopping 135 health, that at least for me, I find myself using Angrath in events a lot more than I thought I might otherwise use Angrath. The next planeswalker that's going to be moving up is going to be Daxos the Returned. Daxos is an incredibly good planeswalker. Daxos is actually going to jump all the way up to S, and I'm pretty sure there are going to be a lot of you who are clamoring for Daxos to be S+, because Daxos is going to be good so long as we have enchantments that are going to be able to serve as removal, because you're able to use your first ability to just fetch enchantments from your library. The first ability is very spammy. Hixis comes in Origins and is a phenomenal method of control. And the first ability is also going to create this Greater Eidolon of Longing, which can serve as a win button on its own. I have some coalition mates that use Daxos for pretty much every event, and they use it for almost every node that they can, because you're able to just establish so much control with Daxos. I'm not personally, for my playstyle, as in love with Daxos as I know that some other people are, but nonetheless, I do recognize how powerful Daxos is. I have been running Daxos a bit more since I've seen how my coalition mates have been running Daxos, and I definitely agree that he deserves to be moved up on the tier list. So Daxos absolutely is an S tier planeswalker. If you want to make an argument for Daxos being in the S plus tier, then by all means, you have a very valid argument for making that case. The next planeswalker that's going to be moving for me is actually going to be moving down. I know that I'm going to be jumping around a little bit here, but I'm actually going to be pointing out Vraska. Now you'll see that I don't even have this Vraska, because this Vraska is that bad. If there's a planeswalker that I don't have, it just means that they don't have a strong enough niche, or it means that they're absolutely terrible. And Vraska Golgari Queen falls on the list of absolutely terrible. None of her 3 abilities have any redeeming quality to them, and even though she's been reworked, she is just bad. The one thing that she does have going for her is that she is green and black, which is a phenomenal color combination. However, we have Vraska the Relic Seeker, who is green and black, and we have Garruk the Cursed Huntsman, who is also green and black, and then we got new Nissa, which is also green and black. So with that in mind, there's really no reason to use 650 mana crystals to pick up Vraska and then throw 160 runes into powering her up, unless you're a collector of collectors. But beyond that, there really isn't a good use for her. The next one that's going to be moving down is a planeswalker that probably didn't deserve to be in the D tier in the first place. I just had a soft spot in my heart, and I at least wanted to somewhat justify my picking him up, but is going to be Ajani Unyielding. Ajani Unyielding really hasn't aged very well. There just really isn't any use for Energize, and Ajani has, even at level 60, a maximum green mana bonus of +2. I know that my Ajani is 40, but Ajani doesn't actually gain any more to the green mana bonus. For that matter, the white mana bonus stays at +4, while the other 3 mana bonuses come out to, I believe, 0. So none of the abilities are good in the current standard. None of the abilities are really good in Legacy. So there's really just no good place for this Ajani to go, sadly. He's not good at all. The next planeswalker that is going to be moving for me, and I know that there are going to be some of you that are going to get all up on your high horse about this particular one, because you really like it, is our red-white Ajani over here. So red-white Ajani has solid abilities. You'll notice that I don't have red-white Ajani, but the real purpose of red-white Ajani, at least that I saw, was for you to be able to make a Hazoret's Undying Fury deck. And this Ajani is just so thoroughly outclassed by Calamity now, especially because the mana gains for Ajani Vengeant really haven't translated into the current game. I'm actually going to be moving Ajani down into the D tier. Now, can you make a good deck with Ajani? Absolutely. But is Ajani good? No. Now, if you're an older player who has just made their statement for the game by playing Ajani, and so you love this planeswalker, I understand that. I absolutely love this planeswalker in Paper Magic. The whole Lightning Helix effect is one of my favorite effects in the game. But in Paper, not so much in Puzzle Quest. It just hasn't translated the same in Puzzle Quest. But nonetheless, Ajani Vengeant just hasn't aged well. And so we've had a power creep in terms of the mana bonuses on our planeswalkers. And so for me personally, it's moved Ajani down a tier. The next one that has moved is going to be Wrenn and 6. Now, I don't happen to think that Wrenn and 6 is a good planeswalker. I don't think that Wrenn is a great planeswalker. However, Wrenn has that magical +5/+5 to the mana bonuses, and at the very least in the current standard with the new lands that we have that give 5 mana to everything in your hand when they're played, you can actually do some pretty cool things between the third ability and the first ability to just get a whole bunch of those down on repeat, and then to just fully fill your hand with mana. You can actually play quite a lot of cards using Wrenn and 6, and so I think that you can make a solid argument for Wrenn and 6 being in the C tier of walkers. I don't think that Wrenn is worth picking up if you don't already have him, but such is life for Wrenn. The rest of the planeswalkers in the C tier, I'm not going to be moving. I think that Sarkhan over here has gotten better with the dragons, but the mana bonuses for this Sarkhan make him borderline unplayable. They're absolutely terrible. at least for me personally, because while dragons are kind of kings right now in the standard for creatures, you just don't have the mana bonuses to be able to get them out without using moxes, so I'm not particularly fond of Sarkhan. Saheeli has actually the best mana bonuses in the game, but Saheeli is held back by the lack of vehicles, and for that matter, all of these planeswalkers in this tier have something that's holding them back, which is part of why they are where they are. The B tier planeswalkers haven't really moved for me, and then the S tier planeswalkers over here, I think, are a pretty solid list. You could make an argument for Kiora moving down. Kiora used to be the end-all be-all best planeswalker in the game, but she's just been so thoroughly outclassed by some of the newer planeswalkers that have come out that she's just no longer the best. And so as she's no longer the best, I think it's better to highlight the planeswalkers that have taken that role and indeed are the best. So now let's go ahead and start moving some of our new planeswalkers onto our tier list. The first of those new planeswalkers that I want to move on up is going to be Arlinn, the Pack's Hope. Arlinn has an incredible amount of power built into her kit. She has that super sweet +5/+5 for both red and green. And so Arlinn is actually able to access a lot from her kit. The problem for me with Arlinn is that she gets stuck in either day or night, and without you having a really good way of being able to swap Arlinn between day and night without using a massive amount of loyalty, and then having her stay on that side, she's really just too much of a niche walker for me. Now, she does indeed have more power than, say, Ren and Six does, and she does have more power than a lot of these other planeswalkers in the C tier, so for me, I'm going to go ahead and have her rest in the B tier. At the very least, the Moon's Fury token, or the Moon's Fury creature, is able to absolutely wipe out your opponent, and in the Werewolf node of the Harvest Tide, Arlinn is a phenomenal option. So she maintains value in the standard event, and she has a lot of power in her kit while having excellent mana bonuses and really strong abilities, but her inability to actually consistently remain on the side that you want definitely detracts from her quite a bit. The next planeswalker to move on to the list is Ashiok, Sculptor of Fears. Ashiok fills a much needed void for blue and black planeswalkers in that Ashiok is a milling planeswalker. Ashiok is going to throw things in the graveyard. So the first ability is going to create a Night Terror token and then destroy the top 4 cards of each player's library and draw you a card, which is very, very useful. That Night Terror token makes it so that when a creature enters into any player's graveyard from their library, your opponent is going to lose 2 life. So this is going to be able to whittle your opponent down. The second ability, Sculpt from Ashes, is going to return the first card from target player's graveyard to your hand and give it full mana. Then if it's not a creature, your opponent's going to lose life, and their first creature gets -6/-6. So this kind of just lets you take free stuff from the graveyard and then play it for yourself, which is definitely really cool. And then finally, the third ability is going to destroy the top 6 cards of each player's library, and then it's going to return up to 1 of each of the different supports from all graveyards to the board under your control. Being able to return something from all graveyards into your control is just so good right now, especially because supports are in such a strong place in the game right now. So I happen to think that Ashiok is pretty solidly in the A tier. Now, granted, remember, I happen to really like playing with graveyard decks, and so I happen to think that Ashiok is definitely worthy of the A tier for that. You can get a lot of consistency out of Ashiok, and you're able to get just a lot of free stuff out of using Ashiok as well. The next planeswalker is actually probably going to surprise you a little bit in the Dungeon Master. So I'm going to go ahead and first move the Dungeon Master where I think the Dungeon Master goes, and then I'm going to explain why I have moved the Dungeon Master, assuming that you don't just Alt F4 the moment that I put the Dungeon Master where I'm going to put the Dungeon Master. So to me, the Dungeon Master is currently an S tier planeswalker. And so this is going to be, I'm sure, controversial for many of you, but at the very least, please hear me out. And if you still disagree with me at the end of this, then by all means, let me know in the comments section. But if you think that I at least made some valid points as to why I think this is an S tier planeswalker, then by all means, once again, let me know. So the Dungeon Master has absolutely terrible abilities, to the extent that it's not even really worth going through the 3 abilities because they're all really bad. For that matter, The saving grace for the Dungeon Master is twofold. The first of them is that the Dungeon Master has +5/+5 to both white and blue, and the Dungeon Master has now become the best way to achieve a full party in the game. So we have an objective in a standard event that requires us to have a full party and to have used a certain number of loyalty abilities. Dungeon Master's first ability, Adventure Begins, is going to venture into a dungeon, it's going to draw a card, it's going to gain mana, it's going to create gold, and so for all intents and purposes, it's just going to help you fill your hand to make sure that you have removal, and it's going to go ahead and give you mana. Then finally, the third ability is going to enable you to just instantly get a full party and then completely achieve the objective. I know that many of you probably wound up spending mana jewels on getting the card Outlaw's Merriment, and it was worth having that singular card because it alone was able to create a full party just by one cast of the card. Dungeon Master is going to have replaced Outlaw's Merriment, and that you only need to have Dungeon Master and the other cards that are going to create a full party, and you're actually going to have a really easy time with that node. Yes, I know that you could go about achieving the objective on that node in other ways. However, the cards that have party are either too strong, aka Angel of Destiny, or just aren't good, aka all of the rest of them. So having the Dungeon Master, at least for me, has made that node actually tolerable and kind of fun. Whereas without the Dungeon Master, I find it to be a slog. So just for that one node, because we're going to have that node in Standard for a long time, I do think that the Dungeon Master is worth picking up if you have extra jewels because of how incredibly good the Dungeon Master is for that node. So that's why the Dungeon Master is an S tier. So yeah, okay. Next up is, I think, the best Planeswalker in the game right now, which is Kasmina Enigma Sage. Kasmina is absolutely an S+ tier Planeswalker, and as I say, I do think that she is the very best Planeswalker in the game. This includes tri-colored Planeswalkers, at least for me. So what does she have going for her? Basically everything. So she has the highest green mana bonus in the game at +5. She's got that +5/+5 with green and blue. And rather than being +5/+5 and then neutral with a -2, she's +5/+5 with an additional +2 in red. So you're able to get a little bit more flexibility out of your swaps if you don't have blue or green, or if you just want to try and take mana away from your opponent. Beyond that, all three of her abilities are very good, and the second ability in particular is just an absolute game changer. So the first ability is going to create a fractal token, which is going to buff up your critter in the first position when it attacks. And then it's also going to fetch cards from your library and give them mana, where that mana is going to be equal to the highest shield among supports you control. It's really easy to get supports with very high shields just by playing a bunch of them, or by using specific support tokens, or just by using Kasmina's abilities. And so as you need, you can wind up using that first ability as just a pick one of the first 4 cards in your library and give it full mana. The second ability, Mentor's Guidance, is going to create an unsolved enigma token. This is going to make it so that when you adamant any 2 colors, you're going to learn at the end of your turn. And so the cards that you're going to learn from, you get 1 from the school of that adamant. So if you get red-white, you're going to get 1 from red-white. You're going to get 2 from the colorless, and then 1 is going to be random from red or white, I believe. If I don't have that right, please tell me, but I'm pretty sure that I do. Nonetheless, because you're going to be getting 2 from that colorless pool, when you wind up making matches, you just wind up getting a whole bunch of free removal, support removal, creature removal. You can get loyalty boosts. You can get buffs to your creatures. The cards with Learn aren't all that great on their own, but when you're just able to get whichever one you want for free by using the second ability, it makes them really, really good. Beyond that, you're also going to copy the first spell in your hand and give it full mana, and you're going to convert all gems on the board to a random color. I find that the ridiculous levels of cascades that you get from Mentor's Guidance makes it so that you can use Mentor's Guidance pretty much every single turn. And so if you just disable one single spell in your hand, then you can just disable it and then just cast a free copy of it every single turn, which gives you so much utility that there's just more to Kasmina than I think there is to any other Planeswalker in the game. Finally, her third ability is able to draw cards and increase your non-spell cards level by X, and it's going to boost your creatures, and it's going to boost your support's shields. There's a lot of utility to this third ability, and so there are going to be times when you're going to want to use it, But for the most part, you'll probably find that you're going to spam that second ability, Mentor's Guidance, and then periodically use the first ability to fetch a specific card that you need and give it full mana at a time that you need it. That said, I find that games are the easiest when I play with Kasmina. My win rate is probably the highest with Kasmina, and she's just an absolute beast of a Planeswalker. Absolutely deserving of being in the S+ tier. The only potential knock on Kasmina is that Kasmina really does require that you have some decent cards in your collection to feel really powerful, but beyond that, she is absolutely excellent. Which brings us to Michael Jackson, the Exonerable. So this one right here so Kaya has cool abilities, and I keep hoping that we're going to get a Kaya that's going to be an S or S+ tier Planeswalker, just an absolute boss of a black-white walker. But all of them just wind up falling just a little bit short for me, or a little bit flat in some area. So Kaya the Exonerable is going to be able to boost a non-token creature and give it Berserker, and then it's going to make it so that when that creature dies, it turns into spirits. The second ability is going to exile an opposing non-token creature, which is really nice. It's going to get rid of your opponent's stuff. And then it's going to take the card and put it into your exile. And then all of your token creatures are going to get a power toughness boost, which is definitely a good ability. And finally, the third ability is going to make it so that if you cast 2 cards in a turn, then you're going to start getting to play free stuff from your hand. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with Kaya, but it's just none of the abilities scream, oh my gosh, I am great, I have so much power. So she's really more in that niche element of being in the C tier for me. Which brings us to Nahiri. So Nahiri, as I go all the way to A for some reason, shame on me. Hair of the Ancients. I said hair. Oh no. I shouldn't pronounce my silent H's for you guys. Heir of the Ancients. I do it and it drives my wife nuts. But whatever. She's not here right now, so I'm allowed to use H's for heir. Or I can actually say it without the H. Nahiri's third ability is one of the strongest abilities in the game. So at the beginning of combat on your turn, you're going to reinforce your first creature X times, where X is the number of other creatures and creature reinforcements you control. We can ignore the rest of the ability because it's not good. And we can also ignore the whole if you have a full party, because party is a terrible mechanic. But that said, this Blade of the Ancients ability is an absolute win of an ability. And as long as red and white have tokens at their disposal, then you using Nahiri, you're going to be able to get creatures into the hundreds of power very easily just by using the third ability. You build up, you use it, and you win. And so because of that, there's just so much power in that ability that she is absolutely deserving of being in the somewhat higher tiers. But because that is her one role, for me at least, she's in the B tier. So there really isn't a lot of flexibility with her. I feel like there is quite a lot of flexibility with some of the other walkers that are in the A tier, but there's just no flexibility with Nahiri over here. You guys might argue, by the way, at the end of this, that I'm not putting enough Planeswalkers into the A tier, and I actually very well could reassess and put some more Planeswalkers into the A tier when all is said and done, after I've gotten more time to settle on the current standard. But it's just, the A tier is just, they're really good Planeswalkers, and they're strong, but they just aren't as good at their role as some of these S+ tier or S tier walkers. That's really all there is to that, so... Anywho, Nahiri, very, very strong, but really only has one role. The other abilities of hers really aren't that good, and her mana gains are just okay. Which brings us to Nico. Now, Nico, once again, is going to be very similar to the Dungeon Master. Nico is the end-all, be-all best Planeswalker that you can use for the Foretell node in our Coalition event. So Nico, for me, is an S-tier walker just because there is no other walker that's going to be as good as Nico for this node. Now, because Karn exists, Karn is definitely a decent second, and that's almost a good enough reason to knock Nico down on the tier list, maybe to the B tier, just because there is such a 1A versus 1B between Nico and Karn. And if you want to have a Planeswalker that's really great for that node, then you could just go ahead and use Karn instead. But part of why I think that Nico is better is that while Karn is able to get to his first ability at 4 loyalty, while Nico gets to it at 6, Nico in the deck building compartment is able to use 7 spells and 6 supports. So just because Karn caps out at being able to have 5 spells, you wind up having some dead weight in the deck, whereas Nico has absolutely no dead weight in a foretell deck. So Nico is by far the best foretell planeswalker, and because Nico is so good in that event, Nico is for me an S tier planeswalker. Now, I wouldn't prioritize getting Nico like I would prioritize getting the Dungeon Master, because Karn exists, and Karn is great. But if you're a person who has like pretty much everything, and you're like, hey, I want to have more fun on that node, then by all means go ahead and pick up Nico, because Nico is without a doubt the best planeswalker in the game for that. Keep in mind, by the way, as I go through these, that I am putting these on the list based on how they play, for the most part, in the current standard, right? And so that's really what I'm basing this off. You know what? For that matter, I've been having Nico in my head, but as I speak about Karn, and I've recorded this like 3 or 4 times, by the way. Now this is like my 4th time going through this, so at least this time I'm gonna let Nico go down to A. Actually, yeah, because Dungeon Master is just the end all be all best, whereas this is a 1A 1B mentality, and I don't want someone to finish watching this video and be like, I need to pick up Nico before I pick up any of these other planeswalkers, because you don't. It's better to get Karn, but if you already have Karn and you're looking for something better, Nico is without a doubt better. It better. That's it. Yeah. Which brings us to Nissa of Shadowed Bows. Nissa of Shadowed Bows is an absolutely phenomenal planeswalker. So her kit is going to enable you to convert gems to an incredible extent. You're able to draw a whole bunch of cards. And then the third ability is just an absolute win con. You just smack down your opponent and destroy them, and well, that's really all that there is to it. It just wins games the turn that you use the ability for the most part. And as long as Gather the Pack is in standard, which it always will be, Nissa of Shadowed Bows is going to be very good. Nissa of Shadowed Bows is kind of like a 1A, 1B with Garruk. I happen to think that Nissa is a little bit better than Garruk if you happen to have all the cards. But Garruk is better than Nissa if you don't have all the cards. Furthermore, Nissa is really good in part because of a lot of the cards that came into the game with the Zendikar set. And so before I put Nissa into the S plus tier, I'm going to go ahead and actually have Nissa in the S tier, just because she's a little bit harder to build around than Garruk is. And while she is still incredibly powerful, and for me personally, she's an S plus tier planeswalker, I want to just settle with her a little bit more, and I just haven't settled with her as much as I have with some of these other walkers in the S plus tier range. Do I think that she's worth it? Absolutely. Do I think that she's great? Absolutely. Do I think for me she's worthy of S plus tier? Yes. Do I think that she's worthy of S plus tier for everyone else? No. So these walkers up here are going to be good regardless of what's in standard, whereas she is card reliant on being really good in standard. So that's why she's there. Which brings us to New Teferi. Now, I don't have New Teferi, so I have to spitball this a little bit. But Teferi seems really good as long as you have the Celestis, and as long as you don't have the Celestis, Teferi just doesn't seem good. The second ability, even if you've leveled Teferi all the way up, is entirely pointless. There's just no reason to ever use it. And the health total on Teferi at level 60 is, I think, 92, which is entirely unusable. The first ability might be better than I think it is, but I would personally probably go for trying to spam out Borrowing Time. With that said, this Teferi to me really just looks like more of a gimmicky walker, and so this Teferi to me is a C-tier planeswalker, which is why I don't have him. You'll notice that I happen to have all the planeswalkers that are B-tier and above, and that's because as long as they're B-tier or above, I think that they're good walkers, and so they're worth having. But this Teferi just doesn't seem like he's a planeswalker that you have to have. So yeah, this brings us to Tibalt. Tibalt. So Tibalt is one that I really went back and forth with a lot when he came out. The second ability, Imposter's Trickery, is just absolutely lethal. It is completely terrifying, and it's so strong right now, especially in conjunction with Tainted Adversary. You just make all of these tokens, they all have haste, they swing at your opponent, they kill your opponent, and that's just all she wrote. If you play against Tibalt in PvP, Tibalt is one of the scariest planeswalkers to go up against in PvP, just because that second ability is going to turn your stuff against you. And if you're PvPing, ideally you're running your best stuff, so you're going to have your best stuff coming back at you again. And that's absolutely terrifying. Furthermore, the third ability, God of Lies, is going to create the Tibalt Cosmic Imposter Vanguard. And it's just so hard to get rid of this thing from your side of the battlefield because we don't have that much that kills Vanguards from our own side of the battlefield. So once this thing comes down, it comes down and it just ruins your day. So it kind of craps in the cereal. So Tibalt is really strong. You can make a solid case for Tibalt being S or S plus tier. If PvP wasn't a thing in the game, Tibalt would be an S tier planeswalker for me. But because PvP is a thing in the game, Tibalt is an S plus tier planeswalker. Tibalt is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best of the red-black planeswalkers. And so if you actually take a look at my S plus tier range up here, we've got the best white-blue, the best red-blue, the best white-red, the best black-green, the best blue-black, the best green-blue, and the best red-black planeswalker. So as for planeswalkers that are missing from this, we're missing red-black and we're missing green-white. You'll see that the best of the red-black and the white-black and the green-white are here in the S tier. I just don't think they have quite as much power as these S plus tier planeswalkers do. If you don't agree, by all means, let me know in the comments. You can make a very good argument for Daxos over here being in the S plus tier, but I don't know. Maybe in the next one. I have to use Daxos a little bit more. He's a borderline one for me for sure. Which brings us to our last one, Will, Scholar of Frost. So Will, Scholar of Frost and Rowan, Scholar of Sparks actually have a lot of really cool power in their kit, but they're going to have power based on the number of enhanced gems that are on the battlefield. And enhanced just never became a strong mechanic. I was really hoping that Will and Rowan would turn out to be absolute rock stars in the Pauper scene for PvP. But even in the Pauper scene for PvP, I found that they just didn't have as much power as other planeswalkers did for Pauper. Be it Garruk or Ashiok or Tibalt, I just wound up getting destroyed by them over and over again when I tried to make Rowan, Scholar of Sparks, and Will work. So there were games where I'd play them and everything would go perfectly and they were absolute bosses. But then there were games that I'd play them and it just didn't work out. And that's just part of enhanced gems being a really weak mechanic for a whole host of reasons. I never wound up making my video on why enhanced fell flat, but between if you have it in your starting hand, it doesn't create the gems. If you destroy the gems, it doesn't count as enhancing. If you wound up getting like subsequent matches and landfalls, it doesn't count as enhancing. You just literally have to swap them yourself. It just didn't work. So there is definitely a lot of power in this walker, but being tied to a fairly weak mechanic, at the very least for now, as Enhance is currently in Standard, is going to drop Will and Rowan down into the C tier. They were way higher for me at the beginning, and when I played them, they felt really strong, but just as I pulled some of those enhanced cards out of the deck, and especially as Ruinous Ultimatum rotated out, they just lost so much power. They have so many abilities, and they're really cool, and I really want them to be good. I really do. But the rotating mana bonuses and then just the enhanced thing fell flat for me personally. So that's where my list is going to end for now. If you're wondering, like, what are my borderline ones? Well, I think that you could make a pretty solid argument for Kaya being A tier. She isn't for me, so that's why she's not there. You could make a solid argument for Arlen being incredibly powerful and moving up. I know that some of you might even want Sorin to move up, but I absolutely hate Sorin. His life total, his mana bonuses, they're just bad. And while white and black happen to be in a really good place right now, they just aren't in a good enough place for me to consider this dude to be good. Maybe I should just play him with Teferi, and that might change my mind, but I doubt it. Calyx just seems to be missing something, so isn't really worth moving. And unfortunately, cycling is not a great thing right now. It's actually entirely terrible. But at the very least in Legacy, you can go infinite so easily with blue-green Nissa that she's just not entirely terrible. So that's where I'm at with my tier list. I hope that in general this helps you for which Planeswalkers you should pick up with the Planeswalker sale. I'm sure that some of you will disagree with some of my placements on this list. If you disagree or you generally agree, by all means, please let me know. Please try to keep your comments civil and productive. Thank you all, as always, so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.